Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bolivia Political Crossroads, episode number 61, if I'm not mistaken. Today is Saturday, May 8th, 2021. After a break for a couple of weeks, it's good to be back. Good morning, Ernesto.
Good morning, Paul. How are you doing? I'm doing fine here. Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing excellent.
You were in the Salar de Uyuni.
I was last weekend. Last weekend we went to the Salar, and it was a good time. I recommend it to anybody who has the inclination. It's definitely worth going. But right now there's no flights. So there were flights before, I believe two or three flights a week, something like that. So if you go over land, it's from Santa Cruz, it's a long trip. It's 840 kilometers to Uyuni, and pretty much I'd say 80% of that is all curves, uphill, downhill. It's pretty stressful driving conditions for the most part. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful ride, but long. Don't do it the way I did it. We left and came back in 5 days. So definitely came back more tired than when I left because of all the driving. I drove the whole time. And if you're going to do it over land from Santa Cruz or from anywhere that's kind of
for
far,
somebody that is not a Bolivian, you would recommend going there.
Oh, definitely. The services were also top notch. I went 18 years ago. But I also went on a different budget in different circumstances. And it was still a good time, but it was it was a 4-day tour. And we started in the south in Tupiza, kind of close to the border with Argentina. And each day we'd go to a different site of interest. And the fourth day, or the last day, was when we get to the Salar. And along the way, you're sleeping basically in like huts, and it's very rustic. This trip, I was surprised to see, we talked about this before we started recording. Despite Uyuni not being a very pleasant place, and Colchani, which is the next town over, which is right there on the edge of the salt flats, there's some extremely fancy hotels. It's surprising to find that, but I guess being probably the number one international tourism destination inside Bolivia, then I guess that shouldn't be surprising. But very, very excellent services, comfortable. The hotel we stayed at had a game room with like ping pong and old school arcade games and a pool table. There was a nice gym.
Wow.
Comfortable beds. There was heating in the rooms. Cable TV.
Was it very cold?
It was pretty cold. During the days, it wasn't awful. But once we went into the tour, we left the hotel around 10:30 in the morning, and we stayed until sunset. And right as the sun is setting, man, the temperature drops like in the blink of an eye, and it was freezing cold.
Did it get to zero?
It got to freezing because in the mornings in our car we left a big water bottle, like a big water jug, and that's how we would fill our water bottles, our little ones. And in the morning, the last day, both days in the morning that we were there was about that much water in the water jug, and it had pieces of ice floating, big pieces of ice. So it got below zero, yes. And so, yeah, it was great. The guide was excellent, very professional. He knew how to take all kinds of cool pictures and very knowledgeable, concerned about safety. Good food. We even had, man, I'll send you pictures afterwards. Maybe I'll put them on our page too.
I think it's a good idea because we're speaking about it, and I think it's very interesting for the people that are listening to us that are not from Bolivia, and many that live here, because many people from Bolivia don't go there.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see your pictures and to hear a little bit about what your experience there.
Yeah, it was a fantastic trip, and an idea for budget for us going over land, a family of 4 staying in nice hotels, food, gasoline, hotels, the tour itself, everything for 5 days. Yeah, 5 days. came out to about $700. Everything.
700. Wow.
Everything. Yeah. So that's it's not a bad deal. One of the nice things about Bolivia is if you're coming from outside the country, generally speaking, things are dirt cheap here, comparatively speaking.
Yeah.
So $700 in Bolivia is a lot of money for most people. But in terms of what you're getting, the experience that you get, it's definitely worth it. That's for sure. So yeah, I'll put the pictures up on our page. That sounds good.
Great.
Getting down to brass tacks, as they say. There's plenty going on. Luis Arce, his presidency, he's at the 6th month. He made it to 6 months. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. I'm just kidding. I'm not a fan, but I hope he can at least last a little while. Stability is nice, right?
Yeah.
And in other news, we've got the new municipal and departmental officials or authorities have been sworn in. So we have new governors, new mayors, and I guess it's really too early. Well, we can talk about that if you like. The coronavirus is in full effect, 3rd wave, with almost 2,000. I think we hit the 2,000 case mark. I mean, for one day yesterday, which we haven't seen for a long time. So we're still dealing with that. It's not getting better, that's for sure. And related to that, with the vaccines, that's a serious issue. We keep bringing it up, and it also doesn't seem we aren't seeing many solutions. I know you got your first shot, which is great. Congratulations, because they are vaccinating. Do we want to talk about your age group or not? I don't know if that's confidential information.
No problem whatsoever.
But
I'm pretty proud of my age.
Everybody's different, but your age group is getting the vaccine, or at least was until they ran out, right? So you got your first shot, and I guess we'll see when you get the second one, because right now there aren't any. In 5 different parts of the country, 5 different regions, there's none to give anymore. So and the government, or at least the health minister, doesn't want to say when we're receiving more. So that's a little troublesome, I guess.
But I think I would start by this point, because you mentioned something that I think is important. We had the highest number of people infected in one day. This was yesterday, right?
Yeah.
This is more than 2,000.
It's somewhere around 2,000.
2,000. Yeah.
I don't think the exact number's super important, but it's.
Do you recall this happening before?
In January, yeah, back. So the first wave was June, July, right? June, July, early August, maybe. Mm-hmm. And numbers got up as high as, I want to say around 1,500, 1,600 per day. I don't remember them getting to 2,000. I'm sorry, I don't have a graph or anything to look at.
Yeah, no, that's my feeling too. This is high. This is the highest.
Back in January, yes, we did. In January, we did. The government, the new administration, or the current administration, at the time back in January, was saying, "Oh, it's because we're doing more testing." That very well may be true. And I've always been kind of a skeptic in terms of paying a lot of attention to the official numbers themselves, because we do have, well, they are including the numbers from the antigen tests now, right? Which they weren't doing before, which are, if you pay for them privately, they're a third of the price, basically, of what the PCR test costs, which were the only ones they were using before to put out official numbers. And you can also get them free. The government was doing mass testing, which now is suspended once again, at least in Santa Cruz, because they don't have any. So there's probably some truth to that. If you look at the numbers, I think it's better, and most people agree, to just kind of look at what's going on with the hospitals and with the health sector, and how many ICU beds are available, how many people are being admitted for coronavirus related issues.
How many people died every
Yeah,
day?
and how many people died. And that's not really changing in terms of between first, second, and third wave. I believe yesterday was like 7 people in Santa Cruz and 16 people in all of Bolivia, which it's not good. If it's 5, it's not good, right? But I mean, what I'm saying is it's not alarming. Is when we have seen days, I believe we got to near 100 deaths in one day, if I'm not mistaken, during the second wave back in January. And so in terms of deaths, it doesn't seem to me like it's any worse, just based on the numbers we're seeing.
The attitude of people is more, they're not as careful as before, right? Or am I wrong?
Who's
I
they?
just see people running around the streets.
Oh,
People in general. People in general
I would agree.
tend not to be too cautious about this nowadays. They are cautious, but not as they should be. Not like a year ago.
Well, people are. I think what it comes down to, Ernesto, in my personal opinion, number one, how many hundreds of thousands of people have already gotten it? And so they say you can get it again. I know you can. I already know 3 people that have gotten it
For a second time.
And one of them right now is in the ICU. But I mean, for the most part, reinfections still seem very, 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 very few and far between. And when you also look at the mortality rate, if you're in a certain age group with no underlying conditions, then the risk of dire consequences is pretty darn low. And so if you already got it, and at this point, I think it's safe to say, they said back in months ago in September, I think it was, when they did the mass antibody testing in Santa Cruz, that they, based on their testing they did, they estimated somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the population in Santa Cruz already got it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was back in September. So what would those numbers be now? And I just think it's a how do you say, conjunto of factors, how many people already got it, they got over it without any major issues, and so they're not too concerned. It's just people are just tired, that what they call the virus fatigue, that they just want to get on with their lives. It's been over a year. And a third factor that I think is important is that at the beginning, and or at least for the first, let's say 4 or 5, even 6 months perhaps, that there was the general fear based on lack of knowledge and statistical information was much greater. Right. People, you remember the first cases here, and the first person who died, they had to go cemetery hopping, basically trying to find a place where they could bury this body from the first coronavirus victim, because they were so afraid of it. It was hysteria. That's the word. There was a mass hysteria because people didn't have a lot of information, and I think thought it was way worse than it is. I'm not saying it's not bad, but for the most part, I just see that being the reality at this point.
But I mean, yeah, it's good. The reasoning is I think it's is reasonable. The reasoning is reasonable in great part of what you're explaining. But like when you compare the situation in Bolivia and you compare the situation in India, for example, we had never experienced something like what I see in India. Am I correct or not? Because although, and despite the fact that there were many people scared at the beginning of this whole process, which is true, there were many deaths in a certain point, but we never had a crisis of the dimension that they're having in India, or the dimension that they had in Peru a while ago. This is, I don't know, 6 or 7 months ago. Mm-hmm. For some reason in Bolivia, and it's not due to the government, not to Janine's government or to this government, it's just for some reason in Bolivia, it never got out of hand. I know there were many people, many cases, many deaths, but nothing that got out of hand again, like it happened in India, like it happened in Brazil. Look at the graves in Brazil. They just opened all these graves and they were putting.
Well, you have two. You have 200. Part of it, I think, is there's a much lower population. There were 11 million people here, right? And the population density, even in urban areas, we're not living on top of each other like they do in many Brazilian in cities and in cities in India, right? I just think that the what's the word I'm looking for? In terms of, I want to say demographic, but I don't know if that's the right term. We don't have those same issues. And remember New York City. New York City was back in March of 2020 was nuts. And again, that's people are living on top of each other in New York City, you know. You don't really see that here. I mean, a little bit. Yes, there are places where people are crowded together and whatnot.
But people in La Paz live one over
Yes,
the other.
that's what I was just thinking of.
And a lot
so,
of people live like that. It never happened, you know.
But I also remember there were, I saw news about this. There were like local, or not local, excuse me, like improvised mobile crematoriums. Is that the word? Like there were cremation carts, man. They were taking around. So that was here. And I don't know. I've talked about this before too. I also think that people have a different perception on the severity of death here. You know, I mean, like people in Bolivia die all the time. and people seem to get over it rather quickly. In a way that I haven't seen, in a way you never see in the United States. I know I've talked about this before. I don't really want to go into it, but I almost think that that's part of it's a cultural thing. I mean, in terms of how many deaths there are per 100,000, we've been in the top 5. Maybe not right now, but for a time, I remember seeing information where Bolivia was in the top 5 coronavirus deaths per 100,000 inhabitants. Whereas, you know, I think that's a pretty good indicator of the seriousness, right? Because you're looking at it proportionally. And I just think people here aren't as, I don't know, maybe I'm incorrect on that. And again, in Brazil and in India, you've got so many people that, you know, the numbers are just going to be high, and it's much easier to create some sensationalistic news about it. Not saying that it's not a big deal that 4,000 people die in a day. It is, but again, I think I went and did the math on this. When 4,000 people die in a day in Brazil, that's like 120 or 130 dying in a day in Bolivia, and that did happen. We got up to 100 deaths a day for a couple of days at one point. But again, in Brazil, it's every day for a long time.
But
I don't know.
It's interesting that, for example, in China, the number of people that died was never too high, right?
Well, China's done not being transparent, and also China is extremely what's the word I'm looking for? Authoritarian, and they just lock you in your houses, man. I mean, you do not go out, and they're much more disciplined, I guess you could say. They're disciplined because they don't have a choice. There's much more extreme consequences. Whereas in Bolivia and Latin America in general, I don't think that's the case.
So. Interesting. It's got to do with the political system, definitely. In China, I don't know. They're probably hid the numbers. You know, that's probably true. But away from that fact, which is as it was probably true, yes, an authoritarian regime helps on this kinds of moments, because they lock people up and people don't have any other alternative. They just stay locked up, you know. It happened in Bolivia. It happened in the regime from Janine, right? That was like much more authoritarian, and people stayed locked up for a long time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we had a success though, because people were locked up, but we still had high numbers.
It didn't. You know why we had high numbers? They're doing something. I mean, it was stupid to only allow people out for 5 hours a day, once a week, because then you're just crowding everybody in. You know, if you only have one one chance to go out all week to get food, right? Then you're gonna take it. And so everybody at the same time is going and crowding the markets and the supermarket. You remember that. It's common sense. And so
But
you're forcing people to all be in the same place at the same time. Just, you know.
But there's one issue that I think is very important because it has to do with the political system. When I studied in political science, I remember setting up the difference between totalitarianism and dictatorship, you know. And it was interesting because dictatorship was anything, you know. Pinochet was a dictator, Banzer was a dictator, and all these military guys were dictators. Totalitarianism makes the difference because it has to do with a more developed society. You cannot have a totalitarian regime in a very underdeveloped system because totalitarianism
implies organization.
Communications. If you reach every one of the persons in a society, you can have a totalitarian regime because you're reaching them. But in Bolivia, you can't reach everybody. In the least developed countries, it's almost impossible to reach people because one, you don't have the media that covers that. Two, you don't have the number of guards that you need in order to repress everybody, you know? Like, it was possible to have Hitler's regime in Germany in the 1930s. Then you would have had the possibility to do it in Latin America because Germany was a developed country already. So they had the mass media to cover all those people, and they had all the roads, they had jeeps, they had trucks, and they had the military men to cover the whole territory of Germany. In an underdeveloped society, you don't have that. You don't have the roads. How can you reach your friend's home in Chuquisaca when he has to walk there from Sucre to his land? So how can they repress him when he's unreachable?
They can't get to him. Yeah,
he's unreachable. Just can't do it, you know. So that being the difference between authoritarianism and totalitarianism, yes, it was worse in 1940s, but it's still bad now because you can order whatever to the people in Bolivia, but you don't have the means to do it. You know, that's what happened to Janine. When Janine was president of Bolivia, she wanted to lock everybody up. She succeeded in the cities, and especially in the areas where the middle class people lived and the upper classes lived. But he could not succeed in the rural areas because they don't have the mechanism to impose that situation they couldn't succeed in the urban areas, in the more far apart areas of the city. So
very true.
What's the point of having all this dictatorship that says, hey, you're locked up? They cannot lock people up. Let's face it, you know. And that's what happened, you know. That's exactly what happened.
It's very true. It's another thing we talked about before is when I work in the restaurant business and we got a permit and I could drive a month after the lockdown started. You got outside, you get outside the 4th ring, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th ring, and it was business as usual for the most part. I mean, it was not like being inside the 4th ring where it was a ghost town, you know, kids running around on the streets and playing and people going to the store on foot. And there was even, I remember seeing people with tables and chairs set up on a corner selling caldos or soup, you know. I mean, a different reality.
That's one. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Then
so that's the point you're making is definitely valid. There was something else I'm going to say, but sorry, it just disappeared. Go ahead.
I have a second point on this, and it's very interesting because there's also a segment in Bolivia that never accepted. First, they didn't accept that there was a pandemic,
right?
And once they couldn't deny there was a pandemic, they never accepted all the precautions that they had to take in order not to get infected. Even today, you know, which is this sector of Bolivia? It's the indigenous sector. It's the Masista sector. because the leaders of the mass, since the beginning of the pandemic until today, they have not really undergone a process of consciousness to the people that this is a pandemic, that it's a very grave situation, and that they have to take care of themselves. They haven't done that. To the contrary, and we've spoken about this before, what they are airing is the contrary position, saying people have to work because they're so poor. These people don't have jobs, they don't have salaries, they don't have any kind of benefits. In order to live day by day, they have to go out and sell their stuff in the streets of every city of Bolivia. So we've talked about this. We said, what's the difference between a leftist like Evo Morales, who is encouraging people to go out and do their business as usual, or the president, the prime minister of Great Britain, which is saying exactly the same thing. Johnson, go out and work because we're capitalists, So communists under Evo Morales and capitalists under Johnson do the same thing because they have to work. One on the one hand because they want to be richer, on the other hand because they have to survive. So that was the second reason why this never had any success. The lockdowns. I mean, it's because there was a whole cultural thing that was embedded in the minds of all these people that are the Masista followers, which are a great amount of people in Bolivia. Percentage-wise, we're speaking about what, 50, 60% of the people in Bolivia vote for the Mas. So all these guys are convinced that why should they do all this effort to avoid the coronavirus? Because their leaders are saying that this is not so bad. So there's another, see, this is a second factor why you just can't do anything about it by force in Bolivia. And that's why we see people just doing their business as usual. You go to the markets in Bolivia and they have been working permanently, aside from the fact that there were first wave or second wave or third wave or between waves, they've just been going to the market.
Everything is normal.
Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting phenomenon, no? What I was going to say about that is that, and there's this strange, there's something strange about it too, because everything's kind of back to normal, but I guess there's this certain, I don't know if you want to call it hypocrisy, but there's a lot of people that are out and you see them with their alcohol and their face masks and they're out at a restaurant or they're out at the market or they're at this, I'm like, and I'll tell you a personal anecdote here. When we were on a trip, we were at one of the hotels, and this hotel, out of every business I've been in whether a hotel or a supermarket or restaurant, a hardware store, whatever, this hotel in Sucre was the most serious about being cautious with biosecurity measures, right? I mean, to an extreme that was almost, I don't want to say unpleasant because I get it, good for them. But I mean, it's a hotel and you feel like you're going into a hospital coronavirus ward. I mean, in terms of like how strict they were with everything. Anyway, so when we got there, they said, they have a buffet breakfast, right? In their little restaurant in the hotel. And they say, when do you want to have your breakfast? Because we're doing it we're scheduling two families or 2 rooms at a time. So not everybody's in there. Okay, we want to go at 7:30 in the morning. Good. So it's us, our group of 6 of us, our family and our 2 friends. And there was another family of about 4 or 6 people, right? It's a buffet. Everybody's getting up and so these people at their tables, 2 meters away from us at their table, with their masks off, eating, talking, blah, blah, blah. We're at our table eating and talking. And my wife gets up and she walks towards the bar where they're preparing omelets, right? To order omelets and pancakes and stuff. And she gets up and she walks towards them and she says, can you, she asked for eggs or omelet, whatever. And this other lady from her table on the other side, we're only 2 tables there, right? 2 groups, walks over towards her with her mask on. She says, can you please put your mask on when you're near the food? And the point I'm trying to make here is it's like, if you're really that concerned about it, what are you doing at a hotel,
Right.
which is not a what do they call them? A necessary. There's a word in English. It's a necessary industry or whatever. I mean, it's a leisure activity. Nobody's. It's not like going to the supermarket or to the pharmacy because you need something. You're at the hotel because you want to take a vacation, and at a buffet nonetheless. At a buffet where everybody's grabbing the same pinchers and pitchers of juice and everything. The point is, sorry, I've totally gone off on a tangent here, but things are back to normal. But then inside of this normalcy that we have in terms of people's behaviors, you have certain people that are acting extremely irrational. If you're concerned about it, stay home.
Sure.
No, it's like, sure. don't go and tell this other person at a buffet that to put their mask up when they stand, or when they stand up from their chair, as if that was going to make a difference. Anyway, sorry.
But no, because you mentioned something before that I don't think.
And this is very common, by the way. It's very common.
Yeah.
I've gotten 2 complaints at a restaurant, at the pizzeria, from people who were upset because all the tables were full. It's open air. It's not an enclosed environment. It's open air, and we couldn't sit down and find a table. And we had to order our pizza to go because this place must have been full of COVID. I'm like, why would you want to sit down then at the table? And why would you stay home and call? It blows. So it's this extremely strange phenomenon, I suppose, behavioral phenomenon of people that are acting in an extremely irrational fashion.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's behavior.
Anyway, sorry.
It's behavior which I want to talk about, because you mentioned something before, and I understand, or I probably guess why you don't want to get more profound on that. Mm-hmm. But I think it's very important, and it's how societies view death, and because not all Americans view death in the same way, right? Mm-hmm. There are Americans that are born, I don't know, Muslims, and they probably see death different than an American that was born Christian, In Bolivia, there's also differences. That's why I want to touch this, because I think that it's an amazing thing, because we're facing a moment in life, in history, where death is so close that our values with respect to death flourish immediately, And I think it's fantastic because, okay, let's look at this. For example, in Bolivia, I share with you the fact that in Bolivia there are definitely views that are different with respect to death. Mm-hmm. Definitely, The reason behind that, I don't really know, because one would have to do a profound research in order to reach a reasonable conclusion. But it is true that in Bolivia, for example, indigenous societies, Aymara and Quechua, for some strange reason, have a view about death that is probably not as dramatic as your traditional Western Spanish heritage in Bolivia. People in the cities that are not Aymaras, or not fully Aymaras, and their culture is more coming from the Iberian Peninsula.
Yeah.
There's something about culture here. I don't know if it's religion or whatever, but it is true, For example, in order to clarify things, it's not unusual to have in La Paz, and I guess that in many other places in Bolivia. I speak about La Paz because I lived in La Paz most of my life, and I'm from La Paz. It's not rare in La Paz that when they start building a building, sorry for the redundancy, I don't
That's
know.
all right. That's all right.
About when they're building or constructing a building, what they do is they have the chaya, and the chaya means they'll open up, they'll dig a hole And there's a movie about this. That's on YouTube, yeah. And they would have, usually they would have some drunkard that is in the streets, supposedly because his life is not worth so much. They would kill him and put him in the hole.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and then they would, yes, and this is in YouTube. You can watch and that's it. That's the chaya, because they have to have some dead body there in order for the construction to be built, quote unquote, strong in the future. Of course, it is much more usual to do that with llamas, baby llamas, and even you go to La Paz and there's
street. Llamas fetuses. You can buy them in the market.
Fetuses are all there. And what do you do? Yeah, what is a fetus? Exactly that. They kill a llama that's going to be born, and they sell it so they can have these rituals, which are cosmological rituals, from the Indian culture. And they put the llamas, just like I expressed before, they dig a hole, they put the llama there, and then they cover it with the land, and they build it. Over that, they construct the building. Except that once in a while, they choose not to do it with a llama because it's much more important. The building is much more important. It's going to be a tall building, or I don't know, 15 stories up. And yeah, they bring a guy, they put him in there. So that sounds abhorrent to some, I don't know, an American guy that's living in the middle of Missouri, and you tell him this, what are you talking about? These people should go to jail. No, they don't go to jail because it's part of culture, But if you read the Bible, you'll find the same things, right? If you look at the Old Testament, part of the rituals in the old cultures of the ancient Hebrews, Israelites, was that they would sacrifice people in order for there to rain or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's part of life. It's part of culture. But in this 21st century, there are still parts of society which are probably less attached to life than other parts of societies. My feeling, and I'm not so cultured to speak about this, but we have to speak because we're also human beings, My feeling is that people that are in the Christian world, or pretty much into the Christian world, are much more attached to the world, to life, than people that are not in the Christian world. For example, when you speak about Muslims, look what they can do with their own lives when they have the idea that they're in a sacred war. Men, they're willing to die. They're willing to die. They do it. They go to the States and they blow up the towers, and they don't care if they blow up with their own lives, because they're doing something so important, for God, that they're willing to give up their lives. And that's a religious thing. And people are willing to do that for a religious purpose.
Right. But in that case, I'd say there's external factors of extremely aggressive, that's just brainwashing, basically, because the ones that are doing that are not the high ranking ones in the terrorist organization, right?
But see, everything
they don't have much to lose.
Yeah, but everything in the world is brainwashing in the end, Everything, we're brainwashed in all societies.
Fair enough, that's true.
Yeah, so yeah, this is part of brainwashing. They do it, The Japanese, when they would grab the
kamikazes,
same thing, for the queen, for the king, for whatever, they would go and bang, they would kill themselves for the emperor. My feeling is that Christian societies are much more attached to life, though, because the value that is given to life is so big in the Christian world that it's just impossible to think that a Christian would do something like that nowadays, because Christians in the past were not like that too. Christians, when Christianity was just emerging, and all these wars were going on between groups of religions, Christians would give up their life too, just like Muslims do it, or Japanese kamikazes would do it, But we reached a moment in life in which the big part of humanity that is in Europe and the States and in Latin America, which is highly Christian, value life a lot. And this is something that came out because I went, and it's interesting to point out because I would have never thought about that, Paul, to tell you the truth.
Mhm.
I went to get the shot on I don't remember, 2 weeks ago or a week ago. And I went very early because this was the first day that they were giving the jab to people that were 60 years old. I'm 63, so I went there running, because I wanted to be the first one to get the shot. So I went there like at 8 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't the first one, but I was in the first batch of people. So what did I see? It was so interesting, because if you would have just leave me in my room and say, what do you think you're going to see there? I would have never imagined this. All these elder people, and these were not only 60-year-olds, they were 70 years old, 75, 80 years old. Mm-hmm. Everybody was, man, desperate to get the vaccine. They were fighting their spaces there. No, I was standing there. No, you were not here. Yes, they were so engaged on this whole thing because they were desperate to live. And this is something that really, wow, because it in a way it contradicts what you said, but mm-hmm. not only culturally, but what really spaces me out is that these are old people. I used to think that people that were older would give a damn for life. People that were 70, 80 years old say, oh, what the hell? I lived my life. If I get coronavirus, let it be, because I lived my life, No, man, they're not willing to do that, and they are fighting their space.
There's my suspicion is there's probably a bias here because you were among the people that go first and go the earliest are the ones that are concerned, right? The ones that are like, oh, I'll go get it tomorrow, or I'll go get it next week, or whatever.
Thousands of those. That's why my whole thousands, man. Yeah, there was a big crowd of elders.
Where'd you go?
To the university, in the Avenida Bush, between the second ring and the third ring. That's where it was full, and they were all ready to fight, man.
Oh,
yes. It was very interesting because I never thought that. I think you're right. I think there's a good number of people that don't give a damn. But believe me, I never thought about a large amount of people, elderly people, that were so desperate to live. It was just funny, And last night I saw a woman, 82 years old, that was crying on TV because she couldn't get the second shot of the Sputnik. She was just crying because she thought that she was going to die. Humanity is so interesting. It never ceases to amaze me what people have in their minds,
It's complex, man. In these,
it is complex. That's the word. Yep.
Odd situations like the one we're in, we'll definitely bring it out or put it at the forefront. I don't know if you want to keep.
Has a lot to do, and you're right.
What's that?
The brainwashing has a lot to do. It's brainwashing everywhere in the world, whether it's religious, whether it's from the people that do business or the politicians or whatever. But finally, people get brainwashed in whatever they receive, and they accept that's what their stand in life, So if you're a Marxista, you won't care about coronavirus. You'll just do as usual your life, If you're, I don't know, in so many different places in the world, people assume certain attitudes that are just surprising, and but the elderly people in the line for the Sputnik were just desperate, and that was amazing for me because
there is no more. I also have a friend that you got the Sputnik then.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a buddy who also another friend who I just found out yesterday got it, and he doesn't know when he's going to get the second one either.
Yeah. I don't know.
Keep our fingers crossed.
We have 79% of protection.
I hope that's true.
I hope so too. We all
hope. Do you want to move on to this topic
sure.
of, I guess it's economic. I mean, there's And I think it's important to touch on, and maybe we can expand on it next time we have the show. I'm not saying that we're finishing right now, but it definitely it deserves deeper analysis. So we talked about this before we came on, and I think these three things all tie together. And Bolivia is, if you ask Evo Morales, we're getting a second aguinaldo this year, right? Because our economic growth is going to be more than 4.5%, which is the rule. In Bolivia, you get 2 Christmas bonuses if economic growth is 4.5% or more. I think it's common sense that after a year where we had negative GDP growth of, what was it, 7%? Then after everything opens back up and people get on with their lives, then of course you're going to have
the rebound.
A rebound, good economic growth, right? But that doesn't mean that the economy is healthy, because to get back to where we were before, it's a long ways off. So there's 3 topics that we touched on that I think they all tie together. One is that the government has announced that they're going to start taxing e-commerce, foreign or multinational, transnational, whatever you want to call them, companies that operate within Bolivia, or at least people subscribe to their services, such as Amazon Prime, Spotify, there's another big one I'm forgetting, Netflix, and others, right? In the end, that, you know, they say, oh, well, if the companies aren't going to pay the taxes, then we're going to tax the users. I guess, I don't know how they do that. It's paid for with credit cards, so maybe get the records from the banks. I don't know, but the point is that they have the intention to do it. I'm not criticizing it because, you know, if you're operating a legit business inside Bolivia and benefiting economically, then you should pay taxes, right? There have been criticisms. I don't know if you've seen this. It's been politicized, where Yerko Nunez, I think it was, said something. How are they going to be taxing people purchasing books and, you know, educational materials when? But whatever. So that's one, right? Taxing e-commerce. A second one. Go ahead.
Taxed in the States, do you pay taxes to an e-commerce? You do.
Of course, right? You do. Yeah. I mean, well, I mean, the tax structures are different, right? And to the way they work, at least in the States, you pay like a sales tax, right? Or maybe there's like a communicate. For Netflix, it's like 10% or something. Like I can't remember exactly, because I use my foreign credit card to pay for it, and I pay a, you know, there's a tax on there. It's like a sales tax. It's like if it's $10.99 a month, I'm paying like $11.98 or whatever, right? Which is absolutely normal. So
in the States, when you purchase something at a store, you usually pay 2 taxes: the value-added tax from the state.
You pay a state sales tax.
Federal, right?
No, there's no federal sales tax. That's run at a state level. But like there are federal taxes, again, like on communications. Like if, let's say you have a online, like a voice over, what do they call that? The internet phone line. There's a federally a federal level tax. So like, you know, whatever, if you pay $15, then you're going to end up paying $16.50 or something, and that's federal, I'm pretty sure. But each state, and that's complicated even in the states, because let's say I live in Washington where there's almost a 10% sales tax, and I order something from Delaware that has no sales tax. You know, am I going to pay the sales tax, or am I not going to pay the sales tax? And so that sometimes it depends on to where it's being shipped to. Sometimes it depends. I'm not an expert by any means, but it's kind of complicated. But people pay it, you know, because they're used to paying sales tax, and nobody's making a stink about it. Here, on the other hand, again, it's already being politicized, and I think that's silly to turn it into a political issue. And again, the government, and this all ties together, is probably doing it because they need money, right? The other two measures that stand out right now are, one is that there was a presidential decree to limit exit of what do you call it, capital or money to $20,000. Whereas before you could take money out, like let's just say you got in an airplane and you're going to leave the country, and you declare if you're taking more than $10,000 in tender currency or whatever you want to call it, you would have to fill out this form, and they would probably ask you questions. I never did it, so I don't know. But you could take up to $50,000 out of the country, just as long as you declared it and you could prove where the money had come from, right? And it was going to be used for whatever. Now they've limited it to $20,000, which if you ask me seems, I mean, that's not a super high amount of money. It's a lot of money, but when the government doesn't want you taking more than $20,000 out of the country, that seems concerning. And the third one is this was big in the news, especially is the abuses committed by customs officials in the airports. When people come in on international flights, there was an order, and this is documented, at least up through March 31st, that all 100% of passengers arriving on international flights, 100% of their suitcases or their luggage had to be manually, what's the word? Manually scanned, not scanned, checked, whatever. And they're retaining all kinds of items to charge import duties on them, which seems extremely excessive. And so, there are measures that, first of all, seem to affect people that mostly aren't mass voters. I mean, I'm generalizing a bit, but at least here in Santa Cruz, you don't hear about this going on in El Alto Airport with people getting their luggage rummaged through and arbitrarily having items retained to pay import duties on. The big one was this lady, there was a woman who came in with an injectable medication that she couldn't get in Bolivia. And according to her, she brought it for her daughter who has some kind of rare disease. And she brought in 57 doses of this injectable medication.
Right.
And she had to pay. They were going to take them, like, no, you didn't declare these. Well, I'm not declaring them because they're not, they say personal use. You have an allowance of X up to $1,000 in certain goods for personal use. Now, if they're for your daughter, that's a legal question, I think, because a minor can't travel out of the country and bring in this necessary medication on her own, right? And so where do you draw the line between what's personal use and, like, if it's for my minor daughter or son and I'm bringing it for them, then where do you draw that line? Because she ended up paying $200 in import duties. Jeez. And when the head of the customs office here in Santa Cruz, I think at the airport, was interviewed, she said, oh, it's because she could only bring in 3 and she was bringing 57. Well, if these 57 were valued at $550 some, which is what apparently was the case, then she's under the $1,000 limit. And, then well, it's not personal use, it's for a daughter. So where do you draw the line? But, these 3 measures in the end, and I'm sorry, I've gone off again. What seems concerning here is they're pretty, they all point to one thing, that the government is looking at very unpleasant ways of generating tax revenue, and probably because they're desperate. So go ahead and take the floor. And if you have any information on legally what can be considered personal use when it pertains to a minor that didn't travel with you, that's an interesting question, I think.
Okay, I'll probably begin with this last topic that you bring up, but it's not the economic issue on this, but it's the legal issue. Mm-hmm. If you have a minor, if I have a minor, then that's part of me. It's because the minor, as you said, cannot go to the States or wherever and bring his own medication.
Much less have the financial resources. She's not working a job to buy it for herself.
Sure. There's no way. So that would be considered legally personal consumption because it's for my kid, not mm-hmm. for my neighbor's kid. Because the idea of not allowing things that are not for personal consumption is that you charge somebody tax because he's going to sell it. That's the underlying reasoning there, right?
Uh-huh.
That's the reason they tax you, because you're bringing this in order to make a deal. You know, you're making business out of this.
Right.
You're bringing this bicycle from Europe because you're going to resell it in twice its price. So please pay your taxes. You know, that's the whole idea. No, the bicycle is for my personal use. Okay, different. Okay, the bicycle is worth $1,000. You can use it. It's for personal use. But the whole idea is that you don't resell it. That's a basic point there. But when you mention something for a minor, there's your son. No, that's personal use, because your son couldn't do it by himself. Okay, on the one hand, so you were right on that. On the other hand, I think that your general perception is correct. I share that perception. No, it's not correct. It's just that I share it. You know, we may be both wrong, but I share that. Yeah, I share that, because I think it's basically they don't have money, so they're doing whatever to get the money. And I especially share it because I see that it's the same thing. See, that's interesting about doing comparative studies, you know, and I'm not really studying. I just read the news, you know. The same thing are doing in Peru, and the same thing are doing in Colombia. You know, all these states don't have money, so they need to get money. However,
they're cracking down at the airports. You've seen similar reports?
No, but the effort to get money out of the pocket of the people, you know. In Colombia, they were trying to raise the value-added tax and so on and so forth. So it's the same thing, you know. Governments are just so worried because they ran out of money. They don't have money anymore. But I think that in this whole effort, going back to Bolivia, there are some interesting things that have to be considered. For example, that I haven't really read carefully the decree that establishes that tax, or I don't know if it's a decree, it would have to be a law that establishes the tax on the internet. That law serves two purposes, I think. One is to get money, but the other one, which is worse than the money issue, is the political issue. If you look which is not having you in the internet. They don't want people on the internet, because they know that in the internet, things like in Colombia erupt because people are in the social media, in the social, So I think that these regimes that are populist, that are always so close to autocracies or to dictatorships, are not really friendly with the internet. And this government in particular is not friendly with the internet. They have already announced that they were trying to have some law in order for you not to insult people in Facebook.
I remember specifically Garcia Linera, when he was still vice president,
right,
saying at a press conference that they were keeping a list of people who spoke against their administration. Like
that was in Evo's government, but in this government, they also announced to do something. Yeah. In one elegant, well, quote unquote, elegant way to do it is to tax people. So, because if you're going to be taxing people because they streamed for an hour or whatever, people are not going to do it anymore, you know, because it's going to cost money. So your time in the internet is going to reduce to the minimum necessary. So it could be interpreted also as a political instrument in order to have people less time on the internet, and that way the government not only would either they get the money for the government, or they reduce the risk, or the political risk, of having people do politics online.
Here's an interesting question that I don't know if either of us have an answer to this, and it's an interesting point that you're making, without a doubt. It makes me think about something. So what the government especially doesn't like is the idea of social media being a tool or a resource for people who want to organize whatever, speak out against the government, organize protests or a paro or this or that, right? Mainly through something like Facebook. Now, the everyday user for something like Facebook isn't, Facebook is free in the sense that they aren't charging you a monthly fee to use it as a normal user. Now, if you have a business and you wanted to advertise, then yes, they're charging you whatever you want to pay for the advertisements, right? But where Facebook is making money, and a huge chunk of their money is data collection. They're collecting, you know, your tendencies and your movement and your behaviors on Facebook, and they're selling that to third parties. And so the government says, oh, well, if the companies, for example, Facebook, aren't going to pay us the taxes, then we're going to charge the users. But how do you, which unquestionably Facebook is benefiting through data collection of its users, how are they going to charge taxes to the users of Facebook when the way that Facebook is charging the user is through the data collection because the user consents, but the Bolivian government has no way of charging the user that tax because they're not paying money. They're paying through their consent to give away their data.
But I don't know if that, okay. I'm gonna relay you some of my remembrances when I took the course of tax law.
Okay.
One of the precepts of tax law in humanity, not only in Bolivia or in the States, anywhere in the world, is that there's a saying in taxing laws. It's the imperium, they call it, the imperium, the power of imperium, el poder del imperio, no? Mm-hmm. And that is a very important concept, because from that poder del imperio, or the imperium power, derives the fact that governments can tax anything. And I still recall when I read a book about taxing way back, I don't know, 20 years ago or more, mm-hmm. The cover of the book said something like, you know, sometime in history, you know, some government official or leader or president or whatever taxed, this was ridiculous, you know, taxed the urinating in places, you know. You can do that, you know, because that's the power of imperium. It says exactly that, you know. A government can tax whatever they want to tax. Mm-hmm. So there is no limits to that. There is no limits to that, you know. Well, there are behaviors in the world today that value-added tax is charged almost everywhere in the world. So for property everywhere in the world, yes. But, you know, if a government would decide to tax you because you spend your time, I don't know, 3 hours a day in Facebook, they could tax you that.
So that's what you're getting at. Like, they can obligate Tigo and Tel and sure. and who's the other internet provider, Cotas, to say, monitor your customers' internet use, and you have to charge a tax for the time they're on Facebook or the time they're on TikTok or whatever. And if you're, you know, and you have to present that in your tax report to the Bolivian IRS.
That's very simple. Nowadays, that's very simple.
Right? Yes. Yeah. Quite they have the resources to do that. That's unquestionable.
Oh yeah. I mean, without going too far away, your phone registers the time that you've been in Facebook every day.
Yeah.
Every day. Yeah. So if your phone has that data, I guess that the government can get that data from your phone or from wherever, but they can do it all the time. So they would know exactly how many minutes you were in Facebook or in Twitter or in Instagram, and they could charge you on that. And
but at this time, it's a super interesting, scary, if you ask me. Do you think it would get? Do you think it's going to get to that? I mean, at this point, that's speculation, a speculative question. Because right now they're talking about services that you pay for monthly, basically, you know, Amazon Prime, Netflix. Right. Netflix is the big one in Bolivia. If I had to bet $100, the one that's making the most money off of monthly subscriptions in Bolivia is Netflix, without a doubt. Probably followed by, I don't know what follows, Amazon Prime and Spotify, if I had to guess.
By far, by far distance, you know, because Netflix is very common, very popular here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But do you see that? Do you see something like that happening here?
I don't see it close, but I wouldn't be surprised that it would happen. I wouldn't, because just think, these people, and this is something that I have mentioned before previously, we have talked about this. If some attribute has the mass leaders, is that they have a good perception about politics in Bolivia. They read politics, I think, better than most.
They're political masterminds compared to their competition.
Yeah. And if you compare it, for example, with the leaders in Colombia, my conclusion is that the leaders of the right in Colombia just they don't have a clue about what they're doing there, because they read politics very bad in their own country. You know, they rely too much in their power, and that, you know, they think that they can just impose any tax to the people and they would solve it, and it didn't happen. But it reminds me a lot of the political right in Santa Cruz. It's pretty much like that. I don't want to be demeaning, but it's like they're like hacendados, you know. Their behavior is like hacendados, you know. The hacendados in Santa Cruz, they do whatever they want to do with the people that are under them. And my feeling is that Colombian leaders on the right are like that, you know, which is not the same, and I'm not trying to save anybody here, it's just my observation, which is not the same, the right people, the rightist people in La Paz, for example, you know, because in La Paz, the people from the right had to live closely with indigenous people, had to live closely with poverty, because it's part of life, you know. So a guy like Samuel, for example, everybody knows who Samuel is. Samuel has always been survived with the mass, and pretty good, you know, without fighting with them, because he understands that it's not good to fight, because if you fight, you're going to lose the fight. So so what he does is he has that level of political consciousness that inhibits him to do the wrong things. My feeling after all this long explanation is that if you tax people because they're spending a lot of time in Facebook, my political feeling is that you would get applauses of that in Bolivia, because the guys that are in Facebook are the right wingers from Bolivia. Very little. I'm sure that there's a lot of people Aymaras online, but the ones that are online are the middle upper class or middle classes from the cities in Bolivia, and those are not the masistas. So my political feeling is that if they would tax that, it would be popular tax, and everybody on the right would be, of course, they would just scream and yell, but they couldn't even go to the streets, because the people that are online don't go out to the streets, because the streets is not where they feel comfortable doing politics. So I hope they don't think about that. I hope they don't do it. But if they do it, my fear, I just mentioned it. I think that would be a measure that wouldn't be so difficult to implement it in Bolivia. A few would cry, but I think a good number of people would applaud and say, ah, good, you know, because of the reasons you mentioned before, because it's not their people, you know, their people are not being hurt there. It's the others, it's the enemy that is being taxed. So in politics, tax the enemy. Yeah, and that's why they're taxing. And I think that your perception was correct offline. You know, your perception with the collection of taxes in Viru Viru and it is the same thing. You know, maybe they're not going to be doing millions of dollars in Viru Viru, but they're attacking.
They're getting something.
Yeah, and you know who is screaming? Oh, all these white asses. You know, culitos blancos that we call here. Yeah, they're screaming. Is that very bad for the government? I don't think so. I think all the other culitos, not the culitos negritos, are applauding and say, "Oh, you're good," you know, because these guys have money and they're not us. So politically, I don't see that it's wrong there. You know, it's bad that they're doing it.
It's awful. It's awful. It's.
But one, it's the desperation. But two, they're doing where it hurts the least politically. And the same goes for the $20,000, $50,000 cap. Well,
yeah.
Because it's so interesting. Bolivia is so it's not interesting. It's just it's so skewed, you know. people here deal with millions of dollars from the Chapare and many of the people, the business people from El Alto deal with a great amount of money. But they don't deal on the banks. They don't deal on Viru Viru and
things, cash and contraband.
Yes, you know that very well, and it happens all the time. But they're not being chased by the government, you know, and the government doesn't chase them on purpose because that's
where they get votes.
Yep. Yep. So
yeah,
here you're seeing taxing as a political instrument.
It blows my mind. The e-commerce one I don't really care about. I mean, that's common sense. I mean, in terms of they're not doing something that most other places in the world are already doing, right?
Right. Correct.
The $20,000 limit is concerning just because it kind of raises a red flag and say, hey, wait a minute, why are you worried about money leaving the country? It makes you think that that people are starting to get their money out for a reason.
Right.
The customs abuse one, or the case with the international airport here in Santa Cruz, having people getting their luggage searched in arbitrary retentions, and bothers me for a bunch of different reasons. I feel bad for people in the tourism sector too, because I mean, there's got to be in terms of countries that have such a huge potential to capture income in the tourism sector, but are doing just about everything possible to discourage it. I don't think anybody beats Bolivia, man. And this is just one more case. You know, who wants to, after they spent at least 6 hours on an airplane to get here from Miami, 10 hours if they're coming from Spain or Europe, or who wants to spend hours in a line and then having their things searched as if they were, suspect of a crime after, all they want to do is get to their hotel or their house and rest, and having to deal with that bullshit. It upsets me.
Yep.
It is what it is. It's part comes with the territory of being here, right?
The $20,000 thing, this is the last thing I'm going to say today, of course, because we're over an hour already. Mm-hmm. Actually, it's a blessing, because in Latin American history, Latin American economic history, what you have seen in similar situations is the prohibition of money going out of the country. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened in most countries most of the time. When countries didn't have money, what they did is they prohibited dollars going out of the country. That happened in Argentina until not too long ago. In Argentina, that was true until 2000, 2001, I think. And it has always been a bad idea, because what it really produces, it really produces a real problem in the country, inside the country, because people still take money out, and so there's a lot of corruption there, But
in a sense of panic.
I don't think this is a good idea what they did in Bolivia, but at least they're not doing that. But you're correct. Your perception is correct. They don't have money, and they're going to do anything for money now. And who they're going to attack. They're going to attack the middle upper class in Bolivia, which is terrible, because that's the only people that pay taxes in
Bolivia.
That's
the people in the formal sector. So,
Yep.
All right. As I usually say, it's good to end on a positive note. And thanks Ernesto for spending the good part of your Saturday morning with me. Thanks everybody who's watching or listening, and see you next time.
Yep. Thank you. Have a good weekend, and glad to have you back in Santa Cruz after your travelings in Uyuni.
For now.
Yeah. All right.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.